Hello everyone and welcome to a video on how to write an LEQ. Today I'm going to be showing you what an LEQ is, how to write one, and the best way you can maximize your points on the AP tests. So to start off with, an LEQ stands for a long essay question, and it's one of the four components that you see on the AP test. It's actually the last one, and it's in conjunction with a DBQ, a document-based question, and you have about 40 minutes to write this LEQ, but you can give or take yourself 5 minutes because it's in a combined period of 1 hour and 40 minutes with the DBQ, so take whatever time you think is necessary for this essay. Now, in context for Carmon's classes for next year, the 2022 to 2023 year, this is really going to be a main component of the APUSH and AP World exams in class for your teachers and also on the AP test. For AP Euro, it's just for this year, it's the last year. So I've essentially put these photos here to show you what an AP prompt could ask for when it comes to timelines for APUSH and AP World and AP Euro as well. So first of all, recognize that this is 15% of your exam score. So it's not high, right? But it's definitely an important portion of it. So if you don't score too good on this, but you score good on the other ones, don't fear. You can still get a 5. You need at least a 70% to get a 5 on most AP tests for history. A 4 will constitute as a 60% to a 70%, and between a 50 to a 60%, and these are, of course, give or take a few percentages, you're probably going to get a 3. Anything below that is a 2 or 1, but you don't really want that. So yeah, it's 50% of the essay, 15% of the test, and it's not really going to be that much of a issue if you don't do the best. But I'm here to tell you that you probably can do your best, and you can probably maximize your ability to get a 5 on a test by doing what I say. I've taken the AP Euro test, got a 5 on it, so I have somewhat of an idea of what they look forward to as a writer for an LEQ. So, for APUSH, you will analyze significant issues in history, and that's the same thing for every class, but it's really important to look at this last bullet point here. And this is what you really have to focus on. So in your AP curriculum, you typically have chapters 1 through 30, 1 through 20, units 1 through 10. And it's really important to understand time periods. So if you look at the very bottom right here, 1491 to 1800, 1800 to 1898, and 1890 to 2001, and you see these options. Well, how an LEQ works on an AP test is that they give you 3 options. They give you 3 things to write about, whether that be between the period of 1491 to 1800, 1800 to 1898, or 1890 to 2001. So you actually have a lot of flexibility. And most of the time, people don't really go for the 1491 to 1800 because that's first semester content that you're a little bit rusty on. So your best bet 90% of the time is to go with option 2 or option 3. This is the same thing for Euro and for AP World. It's just the time periods are different, but this is actually something that's very convenient for you as a writer on these AP tests. You actually have options. So, with that being said, let's actually get into what they look forward to on a long essay question and, what type of prompts you're going to see. So, these are prompts that you actually have to make everything out of your head. So, they give you a prompt, and there are 3 versions of a prompt that you can see. Evaluate the extent, compare and contrast, and support, modify, or refute this interpretation. The first and the last prompt, or the versions of prompts that I've shown you, are very similar, but you can somewhat interpret them a little bit differently. And I have provided you prompts from APUSH, general prompts that people should kind of be able to recognize if they don't know that much historical content to work with. So you have typically prompts called evaluate the extent. And this is the one that AP history classes really, really push forward. The other 2, they're possible that you could get them, but they're very unlikely. I actually looked towards the last 5 years of AP tests, and the amount of compare and contrast and support, modify, refute this claims that you get are very, very small. The AP classroom really, really likes this evaluate the extent type prompt, and I'm here to explain what it is. And it's very important to understand how to approach a prompt, because then you want to be able to write the best you can in the context of what they're asking you to do. So an evaluate the extent prompt is essentially asking you, to what degree is this event important to this idea? So if you look at this prompt here, prompt number 2, evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War between 1754 and 1763, marked a turning point in American relations with Great Britain. Another way to interpret this prompt, and one way that it's really helpful for students, is to essentially say, to what degree was the 7 Years' War important to American relations with Great Britain? And of course, it's going to be like evaluate, the argument, analyze what changed, what stayed the same. So that's kind of like, asking you not only how important was this event, but was it super important? Was it not important? Or was it kind of in the middle? And my best suggestion for people writing these prompts, and you will most definitely write a prompt like this in your history classes, is to always go in the middle. And I say this because you are writing these things without any provided evidence in front of you. You have to make this from your head. That is the one thing that makes an LEQ very challenging. You actually have to create your evidence and your analysis for yourself. So when you have an evaluate the extent prompt, always go in the middle because you have more things to write about. You can say, for example, in this prompt, the 7 Years' War, blah 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 blah, was a good thing for American relations with Great Britain, or a bad thing. And you can say it in the same essay. You can make one body paragraph dedicated to explaining why it was good for Great Britain and American relations, and one body paragraph for why your these relations worsened because of the 7 Years' War. And of course, what I just said may not be historically accurate. I'm just trying to provide an example for what they really look forward to. And this really hits on these historical thinking skills that the AP classroom really likes, and it's called the historical thinking skill of periodization. Basically, understanding between this period what is happening in contexts of the events that occur within it, and how those events all relate to one another in a chronological order, impacting the outcome of history. And the best way to essentially look at this type of stuff is, again, with, how important was this event between this time period, and how did it make an impact, whether it made a good or bad impact. So again, always remember, always go in the middle for these prompts. And I will write a thesis for this prompt later on in the video. I'll timestamp actually every portion of this video for what you may need help with. Next up is a compare and contrast prompt. So you don't really have to look at what this is saying, but you can assume what a compare and contrast prompt is going to be. It's going to give you two historical events, right? In this case, it was the treaties negotiated in Vienna after the fall of Napoleon I in 1815, and the Treaty of Versailles. And you have to evaluate to a degree, actually, how successful each one was. But again, you actually have to compare it, right? You have to compare, like, okay, why was this successful and this wasn't, or why this failed and why this didn't fail, right? It's, again, somewhat of an evaluate the extent prompt, and most of these prompts are always trying to see how well you can evaluate the extent too, but it's also comparing and contrasting two events. And these are actually typically trickier for people because they could be from a semester 1 topic and a semester 2 topic. So if you get this type of prompt on a AP test, it's going to be much more difficult for you. That's what the AP classroom likes to do. They typically like to give you prompts from a later period and a earlier period. And you are most likely not going to pick this prompt, but in the case that you do, here's a way that you can actually attempt to work through it. So when you want to get a compare and contrast prompt and you want to do it, you kind of do the same thing as I said for evaluate the extent. Most of this is going to be the same feedback from me. You want to create two body paragraphs, okay, with evidence analysis and another piece of evidence and analysis, and another body paragraph with the same thing, evidence analysis, but you don't want to try to compare and contrast the things. You actually want to just explain them, okay? And what I mean by that is, for example, in this prompt, I look at the treaties negotiated in Vienna after the fall of Napoleon I. Well, what I would do is have a body paragraph dedicated to why the reasons of Vienna were so much, or were successful. And then in my second body paragraph, I would just talk about the Treaty of Versailles and why it failed. And then, because of the way I've structured it, it becomes apparent why one was successful and the other one wasn't. Now, I would also like to note that you shouldn't be completely writing only about, the Treaty of Versailles or the treaties negotiated in Vienna in one body paragraph and then the other. You also want to slightly tie it in at the very end of each analysis sentence. Talk a little bit about how it relates to the Treaty of Versailles when you're talking about Vienna, and how the Treaty of Versailles and Vienna are related well, I call it a clinger. It's the last sentence in your analysis for each point that you're talking about. And when you see typically these prompts, you don't want to do it, by the way. You don't. It's just they grade much more harsher on these because students typically do worse. So always try to stick to about the extent. Always try to stick to questions where they ask you to what degree, because you have a lot of leeway. You can talk about um, going in the middle again, right? Or if you very feel strongly about, or if you feel strongly about a specific idea that you have, and you think you are capable of using or going totally one-sided, then go for it. All right. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't, but I'm saying that if you want to broaden your ability to talk about things, because it's very hard to be only one-sided on an issue. Most people always have like, or at least in history, there are many things that contributed to an event. So when you look at evaluate the extent, go in the middle, because the 7 Years' War may have not been the only thing that contributed to American relations worsening or getting better between the period of 1754 to 1763 between America and Great Britain. And the same thing for this third prompt, between evaluate the extent to which the Mexican-American War marked a turning point in the debate over slavery in the United States. That doesn't necessarily have to mean that the Mexican-American War was the biggest contributing factor to the issues regarding slavery in the United States. There could have been another thing that happened, and I would suggest you describe that. If you believe there are greater events besides these that are mentioned within the prompt, then go and pick those as well in your thesis. Note them, and you can talk about them. That's what I mean by going in the middle. You don't have to necessarily say like the American-Mexican War didn't contribute at all. You could say it contributed to this because of blah 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 blah. However, this also contributed to that. And what you can do when you're structuring your essay is you can talk about, okay, my first body paragraph of analysis and evidence, I'm going to be talking about the Mexican-American War. And my second body paragraph, I can be talking about the other thing that I feel strongly about. All right, I hope that makes sense. But you're also going to get this thing at the end of some of your essays: support, modify, or refute this interpretation. Basically, it's a very cheeky way of calling it evaluate the extent. Remember how I said evaluate the extent is just basically going in the middle, going towards, either a positive or negative or directly in the middle? This is basically saying, all right, I'm going to make a claim. So let's say they make the claim of, see how far the 7 Years' War marked the turning point in American relations. And then you either support whether that is a true state, or, well, sorry, it won't make a statement like this. It'll be like, the 7 Years' War was a turning point in American relations with Great Britain. Then it will ask you to support, modify, or refute the claim, which in a sense is basically saying to evaluate the extent of, because like it's making that statement and you either have to refute it, either you modify, meaning that you go in the middle, or you support it fully and then you justify your answer with evidence. So I hope this makes sense. All right, this is basically what you will be seeing on an AP test, and 90% of the time, again, it's going to be evaluate the extent to it. So make sure you practice this type of essay, because it's going to increase your chance of really being able to understand what a question is asking you on an LEQ. So next, what are the components of an LEQ? I've been talking about these body paragraphs and all this stuff, but what do people really look for in an LEQ? Well, there are really 4 parts. There is your contextualization, your thesis, your first body paragraph evidence, and your second body paragraph evidence, and then your analysis. Okay? And each of these are scored between 0 to 1 point. There is no 0.5, there is no 0.75. It's either you get the point or you fail to get the point. Now, if you look at this, all the points add up to 6. So a 6 out of 6 is 100% on the essay. Good job, you did well. A 5 out of 6 is actually an A. It's approximately a 92%. A 4 out of 6 is a B. A 3 out of 6 is a C. A 2 out of 6 is a D. 1 out of 6 you really don't want to be looking forward to, so it's probably an F, and a 0 out of 6 means that you either didn't answer the prompt and wrote about something completely different, or you just didn't do it. Now, what is the contextualization, and where is this located within your essay? So first of all, let me kind of structure what an essay looks like. You're going to have, blah 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 contextualization. You're going to then actually lead that in with a thesis, and then you're going to have body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, and then you're going to have your conclusion, which is going to consist of something called a historical connection, which I didn't mention in this portion with the analysis, but it's part of your analysis, and I can show you what an example essay looks like. basically this. You have your contextualization here, you have your thesis, you have your evidence. This is analysis typically. This is evidence, analysis, and this is your first body paragraph. This is your second or third evidence, analysis here, then evidence, analysis here. Then this is a conclusion, and this is a historical connection, which is part of your analysis. It's just it looks for something different. So, what is the structure of this? A contextualization first, a thesis second. When you go into your body paragraph, you are first to write your first piece of evidence, back it up with analysis, and I'll call it evidence 1, and then you have analysis, then you have evidence 2, and analysis. Then you make a break, and this is when you talk about your second thing that you believe in. All right, evidence 3, analysis, evidence 4, analysis. Now, one more thing I'd like to make clear with these evaluate the extent prompts when it comes to the structure of these things, they don't always have to be two topics. Like, you can't, if it asks you about like the Mexican-American War with regards to slavery, like in the third prompt, you don't only have to say that, oh, it was the Mexican-American War and, something else. You could talk about 3 or 4 other things. As long as you can suffice having 4 pieces of solid evidence that you can make up from yourself with an analysis backing it up, you should be good. Okay? So now, what is all these things? What is the AP Classroom looking for? So contextualization, as I'll read it off, it describes a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. Basically, it's like a backstory. Okay? So if you look at this prompt here, evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War marked a turning point in American relations with Great Britain, you would look at this prompt and you would provide a backstory to it. So what was happening before this event, right? And the way you approach a contextualization, and I'll explain this later in the video, is that you just provide, or you assume that the person that you are writing this to has no idea about your essay. And one thing I really want to note about an LEQ is that it's really 2 things. It's really you writing a narrative, a story, basically about this historical event, but at the same time arguing why your interpretation of the story is valid. And that's where the analysis comes in. The explanation of the story is the contextualization. You're basically saying, like, look, you're like, I believe this, and this is what was some information that you need as a reader to know before I explain this. Again, remember that although these people that are grading your tests are historians and have worked with, piece of evidence like this for years, you have to assume that although they actually understand the history you're talking about, you have to assume that these people are actually stupid. Like, they have no idea. So when you're talking about your contextualization, assume that the person that you're talking to is like a 5-year-old. Provide a story. Make it as thoughtful as possible. Provide all aspects, okay? And when I say all aspects, what do I mean by that? Talk about evidence regarding politics, societal changes, the economy. Provide all of that, okay? If you think about it as an analogy, like a date, this is the first introduction. You want to make it good, and you want to provide a lot about yourself, okay? So with this contextualization, not only do you want to provide a good backstory, but make it one of the more meatier portions of your essay. Make this really big and thick. Essentially, like, the AP test only wants you to have it for like 3 sentences. Make it 6, make it 8. Really show the reader that you know what you are talking about. That you, and this is one of the harder points to get. It's not the hardest, but it's most students, like, it's about a 50-50 chance they'll get it. So you want to start off strong, okay? And in context of the structure of your essay, the contextualization, and this is a perfectly structured essay in my opinion, it goes in conjunction with the thesis. So you have the contextualization first, and then you have a thesis. So what is a thesis? Well, notice how I said that you not only want to provide a story, an explanation of how you know or you understand this event, but also explain why the way you view this event, because history is subjective, by the way. Like, not everyone interprets the same thing through the same lens. What your thesis is doing is setting up the later structure of your essay. Okay, and this is essentially a defensible claim, so you can't make it up, and just make up BS. You have to actually make it historically accurate and make it arguable. Okay, so like, some people, when they look at your thesis, may actually disagree with that. So when you look at this, evaluate the extent, you may say that I disagree. I don't think the 7 Years' War was a contributor to the American Revolution, or the relations with American people and the Great Britain nation. Right? People can disagree with that, and that's actually the purpose of a thesis. You want it to be actually disagreeable, but also agreeable. That's what it means to be defensible. Okay, and it is right after your context. So make sure your thesis is argumentative. Okay, and remember, for evaluate the extent, you can always have several things talking about your thesis. Now, I will explain what a thesis should look like, and I will use the LEQ provided here. But that is the basic idea of a thesis. So, evidence. You have to make this out of your head, alright? You have to know the history well. This is why an LEQ is probably one of the hardest things on the test, because not everyone remembers stuff as clearly as other people do. So, evidence 1 and evidence 2, the way I interpret it is body paragraph evidence 1 and body paragraph evidence 2, okay? Now, the AP test does it a little bit differently. They want you to provide specific examples of evidence relevant to the topic of the prompt and support an argument in response to the prompt using relevant examples of evidence. So, for example, regarding that prompt that I had, all right, if I wanted to talk about the 7 Years' War, I will be talking about, actions leading after that. So, for example, in 1763, after the 7 Years' War ended, America issued this thing called the Proclamation Act. You don't need to know what that is, but it's a specific act, or not America, sorry, but Great Britain passed this. It's a specific act that is relevant to the prompt and can further develop what I'm arguing. Okay. I could, this is typically for when you're talking about like political events. This is where you start listing things like acts or events that happen that would further your argument. Okay. And you normally get, if you do well on evidence like point 1, you're probably going to get point 2. This is not very hard to get. Your evidence 1 and 2 are not very hard to get. Your thesis is not very hard to get. Your contextualization and your analysis are the hardest parts to get. Okay? Evidence is really just laying out things. Okay? So, no dates, spew them out. Spew dates out as best as you can. And make sure that they are historically relevant to your prompt, okay? Because you don't want to be throwing out dates that are random. Make sure that whatever you're talking about, whatever thing, whatever event, whatever person, all right? Evidence doesn't have to be an event. It could be an action. It could be a person that was contributing to something. Whatever it is, okay? Make sure you explain it. Okay, and what I mean by that is if I say the Proclamation Act of 1763, I explain what it is. Okay? And make sure it's relevant. Make sure you put a date into it. Basically, have the who, what, when, where. Not the why. The why is your analysis. 1 second. Sorry about that. So, the evidence, to put it simply, is the who, what, when, where, not the why. The why is your analysis. So if you can do that for every evidence piece that you have, so for the 4 here, right? Evidence here, evidence here, evidence here, and evidence here, you'll probably get both of these points easily. Most people can secure a 3 out of 6 on an AP test if they have just decent understanding. And it's either because they can get the thesis and contextualization and one of the evidences. It's harder to get the analysis, and evidence 2, a little bit harder, but it's still pretty reasonable to get. This is not out of anyone's reach. If you have done the reading, you should be able to get at least these 4 points. A little bit harder for context, but still very manageable. So last you have analysis. And basically remember how I said that a historical essay is very similar to this idea of explaining a story, but also providing, why your interpretation of that story is valid. This is the part where you explain why it's valid. This is the part where you explain the why and the hows. Okay? You can explain the hows and evidence, but the whys as well. And I'll read it out. The first point of analysis is the easier one to get. It's using historical reasoning, comparison, causation, CCOT, which is just continuity, to frame or structure an argument that addresses the prompt. And portion 2 is demonstrates a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question. So how do you get these points? Well, you explain the nuance of an issue by analyzing multiple variables, explaining both similarity and difference, or explaining both continuity and change, or explaining multiple causes, or explaining both cause and effects. I want everyone to really understand this one, causes and effects. That is super, 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 super important. That is actually the easiest way that you can get analysis. I mean, if you look at history, it has always been a cause and effect. Someone did X, Y happened. So when you are explaining your evidence and your analysis, because these guys go in conjunction with one another. If you look at this essay right here, although it says evidence, this portion right here is all analysis. So why do I say that cause and effect is easy? Well, first of all, it is literally how history works. When you're reading it, you're always reading a cause and effect. This person did this, this effect happened. And I know I'm being repetitive, but it's very important that you typically stick towards this. This will increase your chances of getting a point for analysis because it's really hard. And when you explain cause and effects, this is how you typically structure it. You put the cause in the evidence. So you say the Proclamation Act was caused by this reasoning, and then you explain what the Proclamation Act is. And this is in context to the second prompt. And I know I'm saying these words, but just know that when you want to write your evidence and structure it, make sure you explain the evidence as a cause. If you want to explain an act, explain what caused the act and what the act was. Your analysis then goes to be why that act was important. And it's important because it affected this event, all right, in this way. And there's different ways of looking at things. So if it's a political figure, you can be like, oh, it increased his power. If you're looking at a general population like society, you can be like, oh, it increased the quality of life for people, that's why it was important. But those are all effects, again, of what a certain event did. All right, so that's where you put your analysis. The effects, that is very important. The why and the effects are very similar. The who, what, when, where, and why. The how is the evidence, really, and the why is why it's important because it affected this, this, and this. Okay, and I'll explain later on in the video what type of perspectives and how you should interpret history based off the perspective that you have to look at, or the group of peoples. And what I mean by that is, like, if you have a prompt about the economy, what you have to focus on. If you have a prompt about society, this is what you have to focus on. If you have a prompt about religion, which is somewhat with society, or in power, you have to focus on certain things. So these are all lenses that you have to look history at. But the way you approach it is very similar. You explain the effects. Okay. And lastly, it is this second point, and this point is very hard to get. I mean, I'm not sure if I got in my essay because they don't actually tell you what you scored on an AP test, like in terms of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the LEQ. They'll just tell you the overall score you got. But this is very hard to get. Like, I think less than 5% of people can get it. And I'm here to tell you what you should do. Right? I say that this is analysis, but this is actually where you talk about your historical connection. And to put it simply, a historical connection is getting the current event you have. So, an example for this prompt, evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War was blah, 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 blah. I've already said it. You would compare the 7 Years' War impact on American relations with Great Britain and compare it to another event in history which impacted the relations between two countries. So, right now, it's 2022. You could be talking about how NATO um, and the Soviet Union's collapse in 1992, and the West's agreement with NATO and the Soviet Union, led to the worsening or the strengthening of relationships between later on the Russian Federation and the West, Western Europe, and just Western civilization. So yeah, when you do this historical connection, though, it's not only like comparing the similarities of those two events, but also comparing them like how they're different. And it's not merely just saying that, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened, and this is similar to this, this, and this. You actually have to explain, similar to the analysis portion. You say like this and this happened, and they both led to this. So you still, and when I say this and this, I mean like event A and event B happened. They're similar because of this reason. All right, and then you explain. You actually talk about how that reason, that effect, all right, or that cause led to an effect that led to a similarity. Okay, so for example, if I want to talk about the Nazi Germany, everyone knows what they did, Holocaust, right? They genocided the Jewish people and other peoples as well, the prisoners of war. But I can compare that to the Armenian genocide, or the genocide the Japanese people did during World War II on on the Chinese people and the other minority groups that they had managed to capture. I would say that these events are both similar because these people in positions of power, so Nazi Germany and Japan, or the Ottoman Empire in 1919, used this power that they had to destroy a minority group through this method, through a genocide, right? Through systematic killing. And it led to, and this led to part that I'm saying right now, is the analysis, and it led to the worsening of the quality of life for many people because they were constantly living in fear of whether or not they're going to die. It, increased the power, and then you can be like, it also increased the power of those in the government because then they have less opposition. Clearly, they are killing these people because not only do they believe that they were inferior, but if in a democratic government, or not necessarily democratic, but one where people can vote, right? You want to remove that opposition so your political party can win. If you manage to kill them in a way, then you have effectively managed to increase your power because no one else is going to be telling you not, that you're wrong. Okay. But I also talk about differences too, in the events or in the groups of people that are doing those things, and you again use the same structure of cause and effect, right? These two events differ because of this reason, and then you go and individually explain what each, how each reason impacted that one event or those two things. Remember, the historical connection, if it's between people, you can compare them between the same time period. So if they are two presidents of different countries, so let's say in 2008, Barack Obama and Putin, you can compare Putin and Barack Obama because they're in the same time period, but you cannot compare Barack Obama with like Barack Obama. All right, if that makes sense. If it's a historical event, like in the case of the prompts I've provided you, what you can do is, use, or typically what you want to do is use two historical events that are from different time periods. That's the best thing to do. And what I want you to recognize, all right, when you're doing these historical connections, and it's very important that you do this actually, is do not make a historical connection on a extraordinarily politically charged idea. As much as you may have your own beliefs, other people have their own beliefs, and these other people are the AP graders. You don't really want to make them mad because, well, quite literally, they have opinions, and if you make them mad, they will perhaps dock you off points. You don't have control over who the AP person is grading your test. Like, you have no idea who this person is. And of course, there are going to be several people grading your test, but you want to prevent them from being angry. So what I suggest you do is do not do politically charged events past the 1992 era, and this is the end of the Cold War for people in APUSH, AP World, and AP Euro. Okay? Do not do things past 1992, and typically stay within the continent that you're doing the class, or the class in. So if you're doing APUSH and you have a prompt that's in the 1840s, compare anything from 1848 or the region 1840 to like 1992, between that time period, or between 1490, which is, the other time when APUSH like begins. So don't do anything past that. Do not make it politically charged and stick within the continent. APUSH material should be typically compared with APUSH material. If you can't do APUSH material, it's not the end of the world. You can still do AP Euro content with APUSH material. You just want to make sure that they're historically relevant and not really past 1992. Again, these are suggestions. I'm not saying that if you do something past 1992, you're going to get docked off points. It's just that you have a chance because people have opinions, and sometimes they may take it out on you, and you don't want to do that. And last thing about a historical connection is that this is like your conclusion, kind of, but it's like in a way that you can actually really get this last analysis point. And the way I suggest people writing historical connections is that just like the contextualization that I said, make that part jam-packed because it's like a date, it's your first introduction. This is the last thing that people read. You want to make a good impression. Make this very jam-packed too. Find every similarity and every difference you can and just spew it all out. This you want to take like 5 minutes for. You want to take 5 minutes for the contextualization. This is a lot of time, or maybe even like 10 minutes. All right, not 10 minutes for both of them. That'd be a little bit concerning, but at least 7 minutes for both of them. That's pretty good time for you to really like make your opinions felt, because contextualization, you can also do analysis in it, by the way, but it's more of a backstory than anything. And historical connection, it's straight analysis, but it's really the last impression. You really want to make a good impression, and that can somewhat tweak. It can somewhat tweak the opinion of the reader. So then, if you got a 4 out of 6, that might make it a 5 out of 6. All right. So that's the general structure of a essay. Now I want to actually look at this essay and kind of point out some things that I like about it. Not necessarily with the content, but with the structure again. So this is the prompt: analyze the factors that led to the First World War in Europe. Now notice how this person has contextualization, and they kind of called it CXT. Do that. When you finish your contextualization, put it, after you finish it, put something in brackets and write CXT and highlight it. On the AP test, I don't think you're provided a highlighter, but you will be provided a pen, right? So you just, well, not you, but you will bring a pen. If you don't have one, get it. I don't know. But you will get, you will write your CXT and make sure you put this right here. Make sure you have CXT here. And then once your CXT is finished, you immediately jump to your thesis, okay? And when you do that, make sure you underline your thesis so people know where things are. Let me provide you a reasoning why that's important, okay? I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to show you why it's much, much more challenging for a reader to kind of figure out where things are if things are not underlined and not italicized, or not italicized, but, you know, kind of spaced out. If I do this, right, if I remove all this, I have no clue as the grader, and this is something I really want people to take out of everything I'm saying. Like, this is very important. This is very, very important. If I don't really like do any spacing between my first body paragraph, my second body paragraph, and my end, how the hell would I know with this big chunk of text where a thesis is? If I'm the grader, I have absolutely no idea. So I may I may think I could read all this and be like, oh, that's great, but where is the thesis? Or, oh, that's great, but where is this evidence? All right? If you want to ensure that you can get a point and make it absolutely clear to the reader, note that you have your contextualization ending in this region right here, right before the thesis. Underline your thesis. Underline it. Okay? Make sure you have noted where your evidence begins and where your other piece of evidence begins. Okay? Your analysis is not as important because they'll kind of assume that it's right after your evidence. That's how it's typically structured. So evidence always after or evidence is always before analysis. Same thing for this. All right? Make sure you do it in the second body paragraph as well. It's not subject to any change. And when you finish your historical connection, make sure you do that. Okay? One last thing when it comes to structure is that you're in a time crunch when you're writing all this stuff. And yes, you know, I know teachers always say, you know, have a topic sentence and have a conclusion, but this is an English class. Okay? I know English classes like you to always be one-sided on issues when you're writing, a literature analysis. Remember how I said if for evaluate they can go in the middle? Go in the middle for this, I mean, history is not the same as, or a history essay is not the same as a literature essay. So one thing I want to make clear is that doing this type of stuff, although it may look like, it's a very elementary thing, like, oh, it's a little kid thing, like, oh, I don't like, formatting. Something like this is very, very helpful for a reader. It can increase your chance. So always note where your context ends, always note where your evidence begins, underline your thesis, okay? And also, another important piece of thing to know is that don't make your stuff flowery. Like, get straight to the point. All right? Don't worry about grammar because this isn't a grammar class. This is literally laying down the facts. Like, do I know what what all this events are and how they are important? Okay? And also, you don't need topic sentences. Everything I just mentioned to you, did I ever tell you that they're grading you on a topic sentence? No. Right? Your flow has to be decent, right, in your essay. Like, it has to make sense, but it doesn't have to be immaculate. It doesn't have to be something crazy. You can use basic vocabulary. They don't care. Okay? Just, you don't even need a conclusion. Like, this person was very generous to put a conclusion. And look how short it is. It's nothing serious. You want to make sure your thesis is good, but your conclusion, it can be kind of bad. I mean, they're not grading you on a conclusion. You don't even need it, in my opinion. Actually, personally, what I do is I don't put a conclusion, I don't put a topic sentence because that saves me time to write other things. Like, these are like 3 sentences and, your hand's cramping, all right? Like, when you're writing this on a piece of paper, your hand is cramping. So, take that into mind. Another thing that I want to talk about structure is how much evidence, how much analysis. Like, this is a thing that a lot of people always worry about. So I said for contextualization, make it jam-packed. Make it 6 sentences. For historical connection, make it jam-packed. Make it 6 sentences. I mean, look at this. This one isn't the best example of it, but for me, always make these 2 things jam-packed. When it comes to analysis and evidence can be 1 to 2 sentences. Typically 1, okay? Or 1.5. Analysis, I would suggest to make it at least 2. 2 to 3 is really good. Never do 1. 1 you really can't make an argument out of. Like 2 sentences of analysis is 8 sentences of analysis total with every evidence. So yeah, stick to 2 pieces of solid and different analysis. Okay, you don't want to be repetitive in these essays. Make sure, and that's why I said that when you were talking in your thesis. All right, always bring up different points. And look at this thesis right here. And it's not just asking about the causes of World War One, but it's a result of alliances, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, imperialism, and German Kaiser Wilhelm II. That's very, very good because that allows you to have so much leeway about what you can talk about, right? You don't have endless ideas. You only have like, you can't remember everything. So if you talk about different things and you can remember like 1 to 2 things about them, you're set. That's what you want to do. All right? So now that I've talked about structure and you have looked at what an LEQ is, it's time to actually talk about how to write one. How to, like, I mean, like, that's really important. So, contextualization. I said it is the backstory. And as much as it is the backstory, there is ways that you can write a contextualization pretty well. Let's go to the first prompt here. Evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War. Alright? Now, I said you have to assume that the person is stupid when they're reading your thing. Okay? Because they are stupid, they don't know what the 7 Years' War is. It is your duty as a writer to explain what the 7 Years' War is. Now you may ask, well, how? Alright? And this is the part where I say that, as much of this is a backstory, it's also explaining like your understanding. Well, this is the structure that I'm going to tell you to use. Okay? Causes of a key term. What is a key term? Again, these are terms that people may not necessarily recognize, like the average population. Go ask your dad if they know what the 7 Years' War is. They have no idea. So this is your responsibility to describe that, okay? You talk about the causes of the 7 Years' War, okay? And this is about 2 sentences. You talk about what that event is. So the 7 Years' War was a battle between, and what it literally is a battle between the British colonies and Great Britain against Native Americans and the French, and it's also why it's called the French and Indian War. And you basically talk about how France loses. All right, that's very important. And then you talk about the effects of that. So you see how this is kind of like analysis as well, by the way? Like all you're doing really in this essay is just analyzing. So then you would be like the effects. Oh, well, because the natives lost and the French leave the North American territory, and that increases British power within North America, abbreviated to NA, and it worsens the quality of life for natives because they lose greater autonomy because the French provided them political autonomy and just wanted them for trade. Now this is worded terribly, but you get the point. I'm talking about the effects of what happens in the French and Indian War. So that should eventually flow into your thesis. And your thesis, I don't want people to simply write, and I'll give you an example of what I actually don't like about this essay, is I don't want people to write, the First World War was caused by alliances, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, imperialism, and German Kaiser Wilhelm. Yes, that will maybe get you a point because you are listing out examples, and that's good. But I want people to be more specific than that. I want people to essentially explain what exactly, with the decline of the Ottoman Empire, caused World War One, right? World War One is tension, right? War is caused by tension, so you should explain, all right, how the fall of the Ottoman Empire led to tension. So be like, and the decline of the Ottoman Empire caused blah blah, which caused this blah 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 blah. Or German Kaiser Wilhelm, right? German Kaiser Wilhelm was a very aggressive and imperialistic leader of Germany. So you can be like, and German Kaiser Wilhelm's aggression towards this scared other nations, okay? And that leads to tension. Be more specific than just simply blurting out these or listing out things. Explain why those things are important. So I will write one right here, again with context of the second plot or the second prompt. The French and Indian War was, and instead of just saying like words like influential, to the development of Great Britain and American relations. You don't want to be something like you don't want to be a neutral connotation where you want to say was detrimental, right? Detrimental to the detrimental meaning like it was damaging, and that's my belief, by the way. That is what I believe. I think that this war was detrimental, and this is how you know that's an argumentative topic, because I'm using words with negative or positive connotation. Was detrimental to American and British relations as the Americans grew significantly angry, right, at the British for imposing stricter laws which made the Americans feel as though they were having their voices silenced, which led to tension because of blah blah blah. So explain why the relationship was breaking apart. If it's talking about a political leader and how they gained power, explain what things that they did actually allowed them to get power. Don't be super specific. Like, make it a very general thing, okay? Like, if you're talking about an act, don't actually, in your evidence, don't actually like talk about the act in your thesis. Kind of summarize what the act did in your thesis. Be like, for the proclamation line of 1763, it was essentially a line that told Americans that they couldn't go past this region. So you could say that this was an act of centralization by the British. They were limiting the colonists' ability to go past a certain region, and that would hurt them because they were their quality of life was limited, something like that. All right, but go beyond just simply merely stating things. You want to be a little bit more specific than that, but not as specific as where you're listing out acts. Okay, you want to kind of you want to provide like a general understanding of what an act did. Did it increase the power of someone at the expense of other people? That's the perspective that you have to look at things in. Okay, so with that being said, evidence. So your evidence, right? I told you to talk about a certain event that did something, like what caused the event, right? So when you're doing evidence, basically what caused the event and what the event was. Very similar again to a contextualization, but remember, when you are saying like this act did this thing, I have no idea why the hell that act was passed, and I have no idea, who passed that act. So one thing I want people to remember is the who, what, when, where. Okay? And this is also applicable to the thesis. Make sure you put time dates in it. It's just going to strengthen your essay a little bit. Time dates aren't the most important thing, but make sure you get them right, and make sure that they're there, really. I mean, it just shows the reader that you have a better understanding. So when it comes to evidence, you're typically going to be using a key term, right? Like the Proclamation Act, as I've mentioned several times. People don't know what that is? Explain it. Anytime you explain an act or a law or an ism, like an ideology, nationalism, imperialism, liberalism, conservatism, socialism, communism, fascism, all these things, explain what it is in one sentence. Because people don't know this. Any term that has some historical thing to it, right? Explain what it is. And this is applicable to your contextualization too. You can be like, oh, this person did this through this. Provide examples too. Provide examples of like what a fascist is. Provide examples of communism, like what their ideas in. Provide examples. Always do that. And when you want to kind of lay out key terms, I think it's best to do it in the context, but you can do it in the evidence too. Okay? So it's not to say that you cannot introduce your evidence or what you're going to be talking about in your context. Because remember, in your context, you're also talking about the effects of things. That would be a pretty decent spot to explain, key terms. For example, let's look at this essay here. They don't really talk about many isms or whatever, but it's still good to kind of like note it. I had another essay up before, and I can show you it right here. This student did a pretty good job of doing or talking about what it was. It's about an alliance system, and this person basically did a perfect example of this in the late 1800s, and you can read from here, but it explains the causes, and if you want to read from here, pause the video. This explains a very good reasoning, right? What were the causes of an alliance system, and what the alliance system consisted of? That's really, really good in context of the prompt. Look, the person highlighted a key term. an alliance system. And as a matter of fact, I want you guys to pause this video and look at this prompt right here, the third one, or the first, number one here, compare and contrast, and explain to me, or just think about what are some key terms that you would probably think about by just reading the prompt. You don't need to know what this historical event was, but just know what is something that you should explain in your context. And I know I'm diverging from evidence, but evidence relates to context, okay? So hopefully you paused it, but for example, for number three, you talk about the Mexican-American War. And you see this time period right here? Use that in your thesis. Use that in any form of evidence that you had, okay? And talk about, this debate over slavery, right? These are two things, right? It's asking you this event and how it caused the debate over slavery. That's really how most of these prompts are. It tells you, like, this event caused, and how did it impact this thing. So you want to explain those two things, how that certain event, that's a key term, or this idea impacted this thing. All right, those are your two key terms. For example, here, the treaties negotiated in Vienna. All right, that's your key term. Greater success than the Treaty of Versailles. So Treaty of Versailles is your second key term, and quite really, the long-term stability of Europeans. That's another thing you should probably know. Okay, so that's your thesis, that's your context, that's your evidence. And lastly, it comes to your analysis. How do you write good analysis? And this is where I said that it's very important to basically be looking at perspectives, right? Many prompts have different types of connotations behind them. They want you to talk about the economy, technology, society, politics, right? All these things. And here are just some general rules of thumb, okay? General rules of thumb for analysis when it comes to this type of stuff is that when you have politics, okay, when you specifically a person, right, or a political action, right, think of like a government institution as an entity. So if it asks you like, how did the U.S. government during this time period, react to these things, right, or cause these things, all right, always look at political institutions as power. How did they increase their power, or how did they decrease their power through the things that they did? So, for example, right, how did, if, for example, Nazi Germany, right, Hitler would create indoctrination camps, the Nazi youth, right, Hitler Youth. How did that impact Hitler's power or just the Nazi Germany's power, right? I mean, that's a very important thing to think about. Or Hitler would throw people in concentration camps if they disagreed with him. How did that impact his power, right? Well, for example, telling people that I'm going to kill you if you don't agree with me, well, that reduces opposition to you because they're going to be much more scared to go against what you say, right? And that allows you to centralize power because you have less opposition. I hope that makes sense. The same thing for indoctrination. You centralize power because people can't think of ways to challenge your authority if they don't have, if they can't make their own ideas. All right? When it comes to society, right? The general public. And these are for typically questions regarding like the Industrial Revolution, woman, right? The AP test kind of has this thing for women. They always like putting it, especially in APUSH. They're more into social things. But like, think about how did the quality of life change? How did the social hierarchy change? Like, people are there's poor people, there's rich people, and there's middle class people. Through a certain economic act, how did the poor people become closer to the rich people? Did they get more money, right? Or you can, when it's talking about the economy, right? This is in particular like the Industrial Revolution. There's a great chance you're going to get a prompt about the Industrial Revolution, by the way, for America, for AP World, or for APUSH, all right? You should talk about technology. Like, how did this technology increase efficiency? How did the economy grow because of all this stuff, right? How are companies flourishing? These are all these perspectives that you have to think about. And when I say like how, you explain, the methods that they did and why those methods were important. That why part again, remember, that's your analysis. That's what you really want to hit on. Okay? And that's really all for this video. I know it's pretty long, but I should have timestamps for every part that people need help with. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on how to write an LEQ, and best of luck to anyone who's going to be doing the AP test this year and for the following years. Thank you for watching.